Okay, looks like we are live yet again.
Yes.
It's been 3 weeks in a row for me, but this is you had a break last week, right? So
Well, kind of. I've been recording stuff for the company that I've been for the open source project I've been working on. So yeah, I've definitely been recording for sure.
Okay. So good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever time it is for you all, because of course it is like 12:30 for us now, but podcast style, you could be listening to this at 1 o'clock in the morning. Who knows? I'm Jessica and Mac is here as well. And this is our episode 1 for Hacking with the Homies. Which is a brand that we've been working on for about 4 years now. Folks may be familiar with our developer conference that we have been running. So, we'll give more information about other things like that. But just want to kind of give a proper intro to kick off this show that we will be running for. The foreseeable future once a month. We're alternating this show with our Train X show, which is more of the AI based show. So excited to have everybody. I see there's already some comments, so I'm going to check in there. But yeah, do you want to give kind of an intro overview into what we want to talk about for this show, Mac?
Yeah, for sure. So today we're going to be talking about open source software, like really how to jumpstart your career as a software developer using open source software. And really, and I know you've probably heard this a lot with open source software. We're going to get into like what is open source software at a high level. And then from there, we'll talk into like why should you care, and kind of jump into how to get started with contributing to an open source project. So those are the things I want to talk about. Jessica, did you have some others?
Yeah, I think that's it. So you and I have a little bit of a different experience because I know, you maintain and run a project as well. So I'm kind of curious to maybe get a little bit more of an idea from your perspective, some of the things that I think could be helpful as I am a person who has definitely done some contributions in the past, but also have just been wanting to understand more about like the behind the scenes and maybe some folks might have that want to know that perspective as well, whether they're trying to get involved or maybe they actually have a project that they want to open source. How does that go? So, maybe we can kind of get a little bit into that. Um,
For sure.
so for today, just to give like a brief TLDR but proper intro, I wanted to say like, okay, so how did you get started in tech and then like kind of making it a little bit more specific, um, how did you get started with open source? Because of course we're talking about like kickstarting your career. So do you feel like the open source aspect of it was a part of how you grew or develop, or what kind of inspired you to that?
So yeah, man. So I'm a little bit older than you, Jessica. I when I got my first computer, uh, my parents didn't have enough money to keep buying software for me. So that was in 1984. So my the way you could before it wasn't called open source software back then. It was this free software, and you could go log into a bulletin board service using dial-up, and you could download software. We used to just call it wares back then, and some of it was open source, or some was free software because open source wasn't a thing yet. Or some of it was I'm ashamed. I was a kid, so and I think hopefully you can't prosecute me now because the limitations are way past through. But we used to download pirated software all day long. But the software I used to spend most of my time looking at is like this this bulletin board service software. Think of it as a multi-user system that allow people to interconnect and talk to each other. Very much like a website today where people can log into a web, like a chat board. Think about it that way. But they
Mhm,
had
mhm.
software for doing that, and it was some of it was free and some of it was paid. But the free stuff you can modify and all that good stuff. So to make a long story short, that is kind of how I got started in software development, or just in general in computers, just being able to download the software and manipulate it as I need it.
So, okay, so now for me, I think I had one of those traditional what people hear nowadays is like for I started in programming more so around like 2014, 2015. So, now open source is so popular and people would be like, "Oh, you're new to tech and you're trying to get some experience. You should go contribute to open source." And I don't know if you remember or have ever been to we used to have a conference here in Detroit called SelfConf. And at the first time I went to SelfConf, there was a woman there. She actually runs the exorcism.io project, which is exorcism like exercises, software exercises,
Oh,
not
wow.
like exercising demons, but
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, "Oh, Jashika, you you really we learned something new about you."
yeah, it was you know, you can go there and basically pretty much any language you're trying to practice, you could do exercises and things of that nature. That's kind of how that site was built. But you know, she got up and did a keynote and says, "Hey, you know, contribute to open source. Also, we're looking for contributors." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds great. I know Git. That sounds amazing." And yeah, for me, you know, the TLDR is as I was getting started at that point, I was kind of in the middle of self-taught and maybe I had started a boot camp or maybe I was transitioning to the boot camp. Because I didn't take a boot camp until I really was trying to go full stack and I took a back end boot camp. So I was trying to figure things out, and I think I must have been in my boot camp or something because I went and did a Java contribution. So it was very interesting because it was like overwhelming when you see a code base for especially at that point for the first time seeing a large code base, and trying to get acclimated to it myself, but also it was the get part that got me. Like, when they're like, "Okay, your PR looks great. Now let's rebase it." I'm like, "What is that?" I don't know what the rebase is. Um, and I kept getting myself in this loop because I had to make changes. I had to pull some changes in, then I was gonna have to force push.
Mhm.
And if you don't really know what you're doing, you end up like constantly wiping your changes out over and over again because it seems like you're doing something wrong. So that was fun. But it was a good learning experience early on. So I
But guess
definitely
guess
don't regret
but
it.
but guess what? I run into this all the time still because so a lot of times I will just I'll it's just I'm so ashamed. I will copy my changes over or I'll stash them, right? Yeah, because I didn't realize the stash command was so powerful, right? And
Mhm,
for
mhm.
those who don't know, but before I knew that, the stash command, I was just copying my code base because I've been through that loop where you'd be like, this isn't right. I shouldn't have to like I keep losing my changes. So yeah, for sure. And that's a whole nother topic that we need to talk about. It's like this getting your hands around Git, right? And figuring that out. But I think like Jessica, when you first like when you did that contribution, like did you actually was it a large contribution or was it a small contribution?
It was relatively small. However, I know that I'm sure I had more than one commit, like multiple commits. I can't remember if I had to squash them.
Mm.
And that was another thing too. So it was like squashing and rebasing was things that I'd never heard of until then. So that was like my sobering moment of, oh, you
Well,
really don't know everything you think you know about Git. There's a lot more
no,
to learn.
no, I commend you though on doing that though, because I think I usually tell people if you're new to open source software and you want to start contributing, I think the first thing people want to do, they want to start writing code. And I personally think that when you're trying to understand a code base, I think updating the documentation is probably the first thing you should do. So help them with documentation because people be thinking like, oh, you're not, that's not a respectable software developer job,
Right, right.
but you get so much clout on like just updating the docs, and it gives you a better understanding of the overall project. And then from there you can kind of take, take a try and take on a small issue and then fix it. But no, you're big dog. You kind of took on a on an issue. And I'm assuming this is an issue. So for those who don't know, this is back it up a little bit. So inside of a open source project, if you want to get into an open source, if you want to start contributing to an open source project, the best thing to do is, one, like I said, look at the docs. Secondly, is that you can go through the issues. And inside GitHub, there's a issues tracking mechanism that's built in. What you should do is just look for, hopefully the project had a mechanism, a taxonomy for tagging issues that are simple or small or not that complex. You probably want to pick that first. And it may be something stupid that they may have you do, but it will give you so much. I think a lot of cases, it'll just give you so much confidence in yourself that you'll be willing to take on bigger stuff, and you'll just start meeting people and talking to them and stuff like that. So that's what I tell people when they want to get started. I don't know if you look at the same way, Jessica.
No, yeah, there's usually you might see tags like a good first issue or something like that, and I would say that that might even tie into the fact that every year Digital Ocean sponsors the Hacktoberfest, which is in October, and that's definitely a place that I recommend folks getting involved if you're just kind of looking like a more formal time to do like open source contributions. But during Hacktoberfest, what they'll do is they'll actually encourage the anybody that wants to make contributions to an open source project to be able to follow these tags, and so they will also encourage the maintainers to add specific tags like that to their issues. But yeah, I found that a lot of people didn't really understand even what else are you looking at in the repository when it comes to open source. How are you finding the different things that you could potentially do, because like you said, there's the documentation side of things where most likely have some type of instructions like here's how to contribute, but then they have the issues, which is where you can go and just kind of give some lend a hand somewhere and kind of see where the need is. And one thing that I also noticed is a lot of people they'll run into bugs in software because it's so common for us to use open source stuff nowadays. Like basically every language we use is open source. All of our tools, a lot of our popular tools are open source. And so I actually literally ran into this with one of my students recently, using, I forget what we were using, but it was some ORM or something like that, and he was on the newest version that had literally just came out like 3 days ago. First of all, I never upgrade that fast, but
Yeah.
that's a whole another topic. And so what happened was he ran into a bug, and we found that it was literally a bug that was introduced in this newer upgrade. I didn't really see anything about it, but it was a new bug that was introduced, and he had been trying to fix it and fix it and fix it himself. And then we realized, like, literally, we just had him downgrade back to like the last version, and everything worked fine. But then I was like, that's another opportunity that a lot of people may contribute, because you might find a bug in the software as you're working with it, and that might not even be logged yet. So when you are coming to the project, not only could you maybe open an issue, but you could say, hey, I found this, but also I'm willing to work on it.
I like that. I like that because just talking from being a maintainer perspective, I have a lot of people who submit issues. Right now we're at like at 56 issues, right? And so that's the thing that people don't understand is that, like, in so I was gonna say you're not getting paid, but there's most open source projects when they first start out, you're not getting paid. This is kind of free software that you're giving. You can obviously create a monetization strategy around it for sure, but a lot of times you're taking your time to do it. So I that's super dope. What you just said is like, you create an issue, yes, where we can track it, but it's an opportunity for you to actually start working on the project as well. And maintainers will truly appreciate it. And if you're looking for an opportunity, especially if you're new to software development, and maybe you're working on a project that's being sponsored by a particular company, it may be an opportunity for you to get hired by that company as well. Because if you do like believe it or not, you don't even have to do anything super complicated. You can just do like handle small little issues that have a huge impact to a bunch of people who are using the project, and they may be like, "Yo, we need you to come work for us." So it's definitely, I think, a gateway into getting a gig.
Yeah, and I know nowadays, but we don't have to go too deep into it. But of course, like, and I think we kind of started talking about this too because it's like a lot of people might have been laid off recently. Folks are trying to develop their careers. There's just a lot of different reasons, or even me, like I'm teaching primarily teaching now because I want to have obviously first I have a new a baby that's like still
Mhm.
under 1 years old. I like to have time with him. I like to be able to just like have more flexibility and I want to do more things like this, podcasts and live streams and things. So I haven't been in a state where I wanted to be a full-time software engineer for a few years, but also I don't want to get rusty. I want to keep like polishing my skills and keep growing as an engineer. So I've been looking at like, okay, open source is an opportunity to do that, but I feel like when it comes to getting into it, maybe is there more so tips about how can people kind of acclimate themselves or level up if they find gaps that they have? Because like I said, I didn't know what the heck a rebase or a squash was, and luckily for me at the time, the project I was working on, there were maintainers who like literally kind of handheld me through figuring out the git commands that I needed to do so I could understand that more. But yeah, just kind of like how folks can practically kind of get started because I think for a lot of people, you go and you're like, yes, I'm going to contribute to React, and then you go to the React repository and you're like, yeah, no, I'm good. Like this is a lot to look at, and it's not like being in a team space where you have an engineer sitting next to you that's going to help you acclimate to the project.
Yeah. I tend not to contribute to foundational open source projects because they are super complicated, right? Just when you're getting started, React, right, has a lot of different components to it. But what I typically do is try and find projects that are that has plugins to it, and React probably has that type of thing as well. I'm not a React guy, but a project that has plugins that you can actually help um, fix bugs or put enhancements to a plugin, because the plugin code is going to be a lot smaller code base to work with, right? Versus you working with some of the core functionality of the project. So that's what I typically look for because that helps me get acclimated to the project. And then
Okay.
and then secondly, um, I I typically look for projects that have a Slack channel or something that or a weekly cadence with the open source developers that are working on their project, because it gives you the ability to like ask them questions, talk to other people in the community about what you're trying to do. Projects that's just been around, like some projects just they're very good, but they don't have a huge community, right? There's not a whole bunch of people, maybe one or two people working on. I tend to shy away from those simply because I don't have the time to go and try and figure all this stuff out. So that's what I've been trying to do, and I know that's probably a bad thing, because obviously a lot of the people who are doing some of these very foundational components need help as well. But
Yeah.
it's just schedule wise, it's just hard for me to get into it.
It can be a lot, but that's what I was saying for folks that are like, okay, so instead of trying to come up with a random project and maybe even losing interest in it over time or having like a lot of small projects, open source could be a good way to go. But I do think what you said is really practical. Like instead of you don't always have to go straight to the code base, straight to the actual tool itself. You could go to related tools or like you said, plugins or things of that nature that will be more of a bite-sized component. We talked about going to the documentation, and I think there's a lot of value, like you said, to go into the documentation. First of all, I'm one of those people that's like, developers, we need to care a lot more about documentation, good documentation, especially since we all know what it's like when you go to work on something and there's not good documentation. But that's something that we all have to kind of pay it forward on. So it's definitely good there, of course. But then it's like, then if it's your first time doing contributions, you can learn about the whole rest of the process without having to worry about also, the technical side of the code base and getting all that running. And I mean specifically like, so that's where I can get my first chance trying to actually go through the entire PR process and go through any new things I need to learn about Git if I haven't done certain type of contribution workflows before, and kind of get all of that out the way on its own. And then, I can actually dive into, okay, now let me get the project running it and let me figure out like, how everything works, because a lot of times you'll probably see things that you haven't worked on before and you don't want to bite off more than you can chew initially. You can kind of break it up.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I think that I think that open source though is a I think a lot of people get it kind of confused in regards to when open source back in the day meant kind of something totally different than what it does now, right? So, I mean, now typically there's business models built around open source, and I think sometimes you need to go and looking at these projects, kind of look at how they make money, especially if you're trying to like if you're looking for a job, right? And you're looking to like somehow figure out how to, like my daughter says, finesse her way into a job. I would if you had to like pick an open source project, go to one that has some funding, right? So there's a lot of open source now has became a software development methodology, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's really, if I look at it very simply, it's just like crowdsourcing software, basically software development, very much like you crowdsource funds for Kickstarter or something like that. You're crowdsourcing the development of a piece of software. And even companies that are highly funded still use open source as a mechanism for a couple of different reasons. One, you get a whole bunch of developers out there working on your project for kind of free. Also, you're building up some adoption, right? So people
Hmm.
are starting to love the project and things of that nature. And obviously, the whole goal is for them, in a lot of cases, for these projects, is to monetize it. So if you're looking at projects that are like early on and they have kind of look up the company that's doing it, like they may have just got some funding. So don't all I'm trying to say is that don't assume that an open source project doesn't have, like, the company behind it doesn't have money. There's
Yeah.
tons of money out there in the open source ecosystem. So you want to align yourself with companies that are funded in building software using this methodology.
That's a good point because I was looking at probably I think it was an Apache related project recently, but what a lot of people won't realize there will be a commercial arm to a particular project. So the project itself, the main code base might be open source, but then the company still may have a commercial version of that software that they maintain or license out, or has extra layers to it. And they may even, like you said, they have the funding, they have dedicated engineers that actually works on it regularly. And then there are some companies, like I've been, my thing is AI and machine learning now, of course, so I've been looking more into projects that fall into that realm, but also finding a lot of companies who are specifically hiring engineers to work on the open source projects specifically. So like you said, it's a good gateway, but also I like to know, depending on what level of support you might need, where you are in your journey, you might want to look for a project where there's going to be, some more consistent like communication, some folks that actually work on it full time, versus, the 100% of the contributors are all part time. Because, depending on how I feel like some people get real eager and they're like, I want to do something right now. And it might take a couple days to hear back from somebody if everybody is a volunteer versus if there's actually engineers that, works on it full time.
Agreed. Absolutely. So, like, let's just jump into a couple of things. Like, what is your? I know this is a little off what we were going to talk about today, but like, what is your favorite open source project today? What would you call it? How do you call it?
Well, honestly, I'm gonna say nowadays my favorite open source thing might be OBS, maybe.
Mm.
Even though I don't use OBS directly all the time, and I've never used the code base directly, but I use a software called Streamlabs OBS, and they are, that is a layer that is actually built on top of OBS, and so that's, like the primary idea behind open source. When I first got started with live streaming, OBS was too overwhelming for me. It was way too much stuff to do, and it was too much stuff to figure out. So I needed something else a little bit more beginner friendly, and it was nice because Streamlabs OBS is built on top, but then it has a lot more it demystifies a lot of things and automates a lot of things for you, so it's a little bit easier to get started in. So as a project, I think what they've done with OBS, which is what, like, open broadcast, I think it's open broadcast software, something like that. I like that project a lot, and they do a lot of good work over there.
Yeah, no, that's dope. I don't know what my favorite is though. I asked you the question. I don't really know what my answer is. Probably I use Jenkins a lot. So
Hmm.
Jenkins is the automation tool that allows you to deploy your code, create pipelines and things of that nature. I use it a lot. Um so I guess that's probably my favorite, but I guess I have it in different categories as
Mhm,
well.
mhm.
Um
Because, like, our languages, like, almost all of our programming languages nowadays are really, like, open source, a lot of the popular ones. It's kinda hard to really just pick out something.
Yeah, I guess the it's but one of the things that like I give mad respect to, like, for just for those who don't know, like, you can go on, like, GitHub has a trending site. Like, you can type in GitHub. I'm just gonna do it real quick. I think it's GitHub trending. Let's see here. Yeah, so you do that. It's like GitHub/trending, and it tells you all the projects that are trending. In particular, like, it'll show you how many stars a particular project got, like, today. Like, I'm looking at it right now, and like one project has 3,400 stars just today. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
wait, what is that? I'm kinda curious
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, so
because
it's
that makes me feel like it's something going on that I'm not aware of, but that's
well
a
that
good point 'cause I never I've started to try to use, like, look at some of these features on GitHub nowadays, because it's getting a lot more onto the social side of what GitHub is.
Yeah, for sure. So I just put it in the chat, and I'm going to show it here too. It's GitHub trending, man. It is
Okay.
pretty interesting.
We,
Hey,
uh,
hey,
we got
Ian. Hey, Ian. Thanks, man. No, I appreciate you, man. Shout out to Postman out there. Postman is the stuff right there. We called them up for our conference, and flew out Ian, and Ian did his thing. So everybody loves Postman. So
and
appreciate
I'm
you.
seeing Ian has the Twitch icon. So we are live on, like, almost everything we could be live on right now, like my Twitch page, LinkedIn, YouTube, across the board. So just, if you want to keep up with everything that's going on, you can follow us across various areas. But happy to see that we have some folks from all different sites checking in right now.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, this is just a way for me to, like, when I want to know what's hot, what everybody's looking at, I kind of go here and kind of look in some of these projects. Now, I'm kind of guilty. I don't necessarily contribute, but I will definitely take a look at these and kind of see if there's anything I want to use. I mean, I don't know, there's, like, back to the whole thing of developers, right? There shouldn't, I mean, yes, you can get overwhelmed with all the projects out there. Just try and pick something you're interested in, and
Mhm.
just gotta jump in and start working on it. I mean, I don't know. I've running, and if you want to evolve yourself to a point where you're running an open source project, that gives you a even, like, different perspective on open source and all that good stuff. And it gets to a point where you appreciate the people that are contributing. Because, like, when you're running an open source project, I've been running one for like 5 years now. It is very um I'm trying to find the nice word to put it. Like every people want stuff all the time. Like I
Mhm.
see all type of issues, and we have a Slack channel, and people are asking us for stuff. And sometimes people are get a little like upset when we break stuff from one release to another. And I'm like, this is an open source project. You can help, or you could be a sponsor to the project or buy support. And a lot of times people just want the free software. And being on the other side and being actually running a project, it does definitely get overwhelming.
Yeah, I don't know. I to that point, I would say I find myself having to have that conversation, even with myself and other people as well. Just in general, I feel like as software engineers, we should be a lot more understanding of how things work. Sometimes you're like, why can't they just have this feature? I don't understand. But then it's like, if you put that tech brain on for like 2 seconds and you thought about how would you possibly implement this feature that you're talking about, then, I find myself being like, oh, you know what? Let me dial it back because I'm sure they're doing their best. And we nothing is perfect, but yeah, it definitely gives you a better perspective if you haven't been a product engineer or something like that of what it really means when you just see, oh, it's easy. You I like when people say you can just add this. It's like, can I just?
So I think the thing that bugs me the most is that so I appreciate all the people that have has been using my open source project for a while, but they want like some way to upgrade from one release to another. And that is for those who are not engineers, just creating a mechanism to upgrade from one version to another. And don't let them be like 3 releases behind, because what you've built is in production, right? So a lot of times people are putting this stuff in production, and they're not buying support, they're not sponsoring the project, not doing anything, but they want to yell at you for not having an upgrade mechanism. I'm like, yo, you know how much time and effort it takes in order to do an upgrade script, and to make sure you do it for every single release, and just deal with like situations like the edge cases. It's a lot of work. So shout out to all those open source contributors out there, and project owners doing their thing. So it's definitely a different hustle.
Yeah.
Um, so what else do we want to talk about? We wanted to talk about, yeah. So we did that. The benefits we already kind of chatted about. Like, we know the benefits of contributing to it, but I think I want to talk about, like, you know people building, like, there's a lot of software engineers that's out in the market right now because of the way the industry is, just the way the economic climate is. This is probably a good time to either contribute or start your own project. I'm a big advocate for starting your own project. I go back to like you know like ngrok, right? So ngrok is this reverse proxy tool, right, for all these developers that's out there. They need to test out their API. That project just started because he needed a way to like test out his API. So he started it, and it just grew massively. And then he kind of turned it into a company. So you don't necessarily have to be thinking about how I'm going to go. Well, I need to find another job. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to go create your own company, get your own following. And you don't need to build something super complicated. ngrok is a fairly simplistic tool that they built, at least the initial version of it. And I don't know. I think I encourage people to definitely think about it. You're on mute.
Yes, beauty. The garbage truck was around the corner, but
Yeah, I understand.
so to that point, because this has been in my mind a lot, what would you say when it comes to like choosing to build something that's open source versus closed source? As far as like IP or like, there's a lot of layers to it. I think like when it's one thing to tell people what your idea is, it's another thing to show people what your like technical process looks like behind the scenes. So is there certain ideas you feel is more suited for that, or maybe is it like when people say, "Hey, don't be too scared to tell your idea," because if you never tell anybody your idea, that doesn't mean like that that's going to just future proof, or save you from anybody ever doing that. I don't know. I feel like maybe there might be a balance, but I definitely have a couple ideas that I'm like, I would like to work on this, but do I want everybody to know the good parts, I guess you could say.
Well, I guess it depends. Like if I think open source has proven itself that you can build, very profitable companies on open source software because simply most people are lazy and they're not going to go and try and reverse engineer your code. They're just going to use it. So so I think, I mean, yeah, there may be some that want to go do it, but I'll tell you, we've changed our licensing mechanism around, the open source project that I work on now. But we had the licensing mechanism in plain sight. I mean, people could, it's in Python code, so people could have ripped it out and went around it. But people didn't. And either A, people are lazy, and I'm being facetious around that, or or people just respect the fact that you're taking your time to build this open source project. And if they have money or their company has money, they'll pay for it or they'll sponsor you. So I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of open source projects out there that um, you know, people have the same fear. So I think it's a very legitimate fear, but I think the benefits has outweighed the negatives of it, because like you look like I'm always fascinated with curl. Like curl. Like
Hmm.
curl is an open source project. If you go on GitHub today, it is being sponsored by some of the largest companies out there because there's different business models. Like you don't necessarily need to go directly after getting customers, but curl is embedded in everything. Like operating systems. Your Mac has curl. I mean, everybody has curl. So they've done a pretty good job to go and get sponsors to help with the development of the project. So I mean, he could have kept it to himself. I don't know, but he's made it so easy to use that people just kind of fell in love with it. So I'm always like, I'm interested in building something like that. Like I always like I'm like that's my thing that I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think like you're trying to think about like how to protect it. I'm trying to think like how can I create something that's so like you know like what's the word like that
Like viral for
yeah,
lack of a better
yeah,
word.
yeah,
Like,
viral that goes
yeah.
viral. Like I want something that like a piece of software that just goes viral everywhere. And I figure if that happens, I, your brand will go up. You'll get sponsors. So it's a different type of monetization of it. But I just think it is just super dope. Linux is another example. But anyway, I'll just shut up about that. But I don't know how you feel about that.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point because I wasn't thinking about it from that perspective. I think, like I said, it's the same with when people are like, I have a startup idea, and then the advice is like, you don't have to worry that like just talking about your idea is going to be your downfall, because usually if you are running a startup or about to start a startup, it's not just about the idea. It's about like if you have the right background for it, and there's a lot of other layers that goes into it. It's not necessarily just like you put an idea out there and then somebody's just going to run with it. And I wasn't thinking about that with the software. Like yeah, if I see something, am I going to try to recreate it, or am I just going to fork it and it's open source. I'm just gonna use the code. So I have to think about it from that perspective. But maybe it's about like looking into what does that monetization look like, because it's different than if you were going to just like close source your software and kind of offer it in a different way. So I do appreciate that perspective for sure. Hopefully that's helpful for some folks as well.
And real quickly, don't like the project that I work on is really building an open source, like building a GUI on top of a piece of other open source software. So don't sleep on that. Like I think people should not sleep on that. Like if you have a certain piece of software that you love but there's no UI for it, or it's just not a very good UI because the people who was creating the core aren't very good at building UIs, man, opportunity because now you're going after a core base that loves the project, but they don't have a very good UI. And I've seen a few companies build very polished, popular UIs on top of the open source project, and they've made tons and tons of money. If you really think of what Red Hat does, right? So Red Hat is probably the biggest and well-known company. Now they're owned by IBM. Like they took Linux, which was open source, and they wrapped around the ease of use and some other things, documentation, support, and things of that nature, and they sold it. So they just sold it to IBM for like some ridiculous numbers
Mm.
of dollars, like billions of dollars. Like, man, I think it was like, now you got me looking here. Red Hat um, sold sold to IBM. See here. So they sold to IBM for $34 billion.
Wow.
And they were I mean, in the beginning, they were, I think, maybe at I don't know, I don't want to start lying. I don't know exactly where they were from a perspective, but they've created value. So there's value in not necessarily creating a brand new open source like its own like project, but building on top of another project. There's tons of value there too.
So that's what I was talking about with Streamlabs OBS. So Streamlabs OBS is obviously built on top of OBS, but and the software Streamlabs software is free to use. But then they have other ways that they have monetized. You know, they have subscription services and they have extra features that they built in. That if you want to have those features, you can just pay for those. But they are an extra layer on top of what's already existing software. So I think that's good advice for folks too. And I was wondering, let me see, did we go through? I think we kind of talked through a lot of the points, but because you have that perspective of, I guess, like being on the maintainer side, if you have any other like tips or advice there.
Yeah, so I think that it's a good question. I think that for open source projects and them just in general, there are always like if you're an infrastructure person, like I think it's something for everybody. So let's say you're not a software developer, right? And you're like, man, I just want to get experience, of being a, I don't know, you want to work on AWS, you want to do something. So most open source projects that have a UI or something, they have infrastructure behind the scenes. That's either they have a test system that you can go play with, or they have infrastructure to be able to do their builds. Like you can get involved that way too, right? So I think there's a little bit of room for everybody. I think everybody thinks, oh my gosh, this is open source, I'm not a software developer. That's all right, because there's still work that needs to be done in the pipelines, right? For making sure whenever there's a new release that is pushed. And then there's testing. So if you want to be a test engineer, there's a lot of people. If you remember our first conference, we had Angie Jones there, super duper known for testing. I didn't even know she made testing, I think, for African American folks in particular, like super dope. So like if you want to be like a tester, like there's all this testing stuff that happens. So I think we need to look at the open source ecosystem as being bigger than just being a software developer.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and maybe that's something we can kind of look into in future episodes and other things because there's so many layers to it. And I think we don't really have the opportunities to talk about it as much as we possibly could, just so people can understand what all goes into it, and kind of thinking outside of the box of what's the traditional ways that we can go into it. I know for me, since I think we kind of got into this conversation because recently, I just did an initiative with Girl Develop It, and we partnered up with a project called Lasagna Love. And Lasagna Love is a project that's basically like connecting folks with like a free meal for whatever reason that they need it for. And it's something that kind of launched during the pandemic and really exploded. It was I think I'll say they've had over 200,000 lasagnas, served over 200,000 lasagnas and fed over 1 million people in 3 years. So it's a volunteer initiative overall, but because of the way that they initially built out their application, now they have to kind of start from the ground up. And so they were like, okay, well, we want to do this open source, and we partnered up with them. So that was really helpful overall. But it's kind of like, as much as I tried to train people up on getting some of those basic Git and GitHub skills, there's still a lot to be kind of built out there as far as supporting. So that's one of the new next things that I'm, personally working on as far as like building out some more materials for how do you use Git and GitHub for open source. I think for crawl, walk, run next month. That's going to be the focus of it, to kind of help people kind of get some of those skills up. But maybe there's other things that, we can think about that just helps people, you know, feel comfortable to contribute and know that they have the right support system, I guess, overall, because it can be kind of intimidating.
For sure. Like, first of all, a shout out to Crawl Walk Run. That is the podcast that Jessica runs. Super dope. So check her out. I don't know. You're giving me an idea now, man. I feel like I need to now create like an open source podcast, like the behind the scenes of open source, building open source. Some name. I gotta come up with a name now because I do think that is very there's a lot to it. There's a lot of money behind it, and a lot of stuff that people can use to kind of grow their career.
Mhm,
Real,
mhm.
what I guess one question though is the like in an open source because I use very basic Git commands, by the way. I don't like I have to go like I ask Chat GPT now whenever I forget something around
Yeah.
Git. Uh like and on top of that, what I hate is like conflicts, right? And
Mhm.
and I hate when I don't use, for those who don't know, I use VI as my editor for 90% of the things I do. I don't use any other editor. Just because I don't think I have the brain capacity to really learn all the different things about it. I'm trying to learn Visual Studio, but it just hasn't been working out for me well. But so I hate conflicts because I have to like because it shows up. It's not pretty in VI, right? It shows up as like equal sign, and then like more than, and then so I have to go. So, but inside of GitHub, you have Git Desktop. So
Mhm.
what I'm asking is really is like, is it the same issues that folks that are learning Git and contributing still having problems? Because the Git Desktop, I've used it a couple of times. I'm like, oh, this is not bad. It kind of tells me what's going on, and I can go fix it right there. I don't have to go do I don't have to go do a clone and then merge it in after I get all the conflicts. Has that been helpful for folks or not really?
Well, there's layers to it, right? Because when it comes to using the GUI for Git and GitHub, um, I shy away from teaching that just because whenever folks are usually learning, they don't already understand the underlying concept. So it
Mm,
can be difficult to try to explain like why that works and what it's doing for you, if you never actually had to resolve a merge conflict, for example, um, or being able to use those tools from the command line. Usually, like, again, for me, if I'm working on a big project with a lot of people, anytime I've worked with on a software team, we always had to do more. I'm not going to say they're complicated, but they really are kind of that basic core set of skills. But like you said, it is different when you are trying to work on a project with a lot of people, and they have a specific way that they like to do things. So the desktop version is definitely helpful. I just found that I guess the way I'll describe it is when I first took a software job, my team lead did not believe in having us use anything except a text editor and the command line. And we were doing Ruby on Rails. And that was, some people were like kind of turned off by that, but it wasn't. I understood where he was coming from because I was one of those people that literally could not deploy my Heroku app when I first started with Java for like 6 months. I couldn't figure out how to deploy my Heroku app because I had never had to compile my Java from the command line. So when it was time to do my build script for Heroku, I didn't understand what was wrong because I didn't even understand what I was doing until I finally tried to compile a program from the command line directly for Java. And I was like, oh, that's what that was in my Heroku command script. Got it. And it took me 6 months
uh,
just to figure that out. So it's just that kind of those kind of layers. But I would say like some of the things that usually are struggles are like you said, resolving merge conflicts,
mm,
understanding how to resolve merge conflicts, um, rebasing or pulling new changes in to something that you're working on. When once people branch off of any type of whatever the flow is, once you branch off and start doing your own thing, typically at some point you're going to have to pull those changes back in before you can merge successfully. So there's the branching and merge conflicts, and uh, overall those tend to cause a lot of issues, and it can be hard to get people to understand like how do you do that, because you really have to actually run into issues. Like it's okay, like merge conflicts, like you can't avoid them. You At some point you're going to have one. That's normal. That's a part of the it's a part of the process, but just understanding how to actually work through those successfully, and once you do, then I don't know. That's kind of like a long rant, but but
No, it's all
those
good.
are some of the things I've been seeing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we want to tell people this is a challenge, right? So I want you to go find a project that you really love, and contribute to it. Especially if you're a software developer just trying to get started, or you're just newly, laid off. This is a great time. It's quite honestly, it's a great job hunting technique. Like if you go and you looked on LinkedIn for all the companies that are hiring, and they have an open source project, man, you know what? Go ahead and do something around that project. And I mean, that may be a way of differentiating yourself, because maybe if you pull an interview with that company, you can say, hey, I committed to, I did I did a PR on this. And obviously the hiring recruiter won't understand that, but but when you get to the point where you're talking to the hiring manager, they can go pull it up and they're like, oh wow, and this, now you can take control of the conversation. Much different than people asking you questions. Now
Yeah.
you can say, hey, this is what I did and blah blah blah. So I don't know, I just think that may be a useful tip.
I like that. I like the having the challenge too. So I want to take it on as a personal challenge too. Maybe we can keep something like that going for our different themes. But um yeah, the overall ideas, there's so many ways that you can get involved in open source. I did mention briefly Hacktoberfest, and that is something that usually literally happens in October. Not to say that that's the only way to get involved, but that is a good resource because
Mhm.
when DigitalOcean hosts the Hacktoberfest, and they always have resources about like GitHub, use just the open source processes overall, and then they also usually have folks that have projects that have like signed up to participate. So even when you're outside of the Hacktoberfest event, there's still usually ways to see which companies or which projects signed up last year, what were the tags you could look for on GitHub and things like that. So I still recommend that as a resource no matter what time of year it is. But I've participated with them before, and they send you T-shirts and all kind of stickers and all kind of stuff if you actually make your contribution goals. So it's a fun way to do it. But there's probably a lot of other things that we can encourage. You have a project, right? I don't think you actually gave us a plug yet, but
No, I didn't.
shameless plug.
Yeah, for sure. The project is DSIP router. It is a management interface for Camilio. Camilio is a open source SIP proxy for being able to proxy VoIP traffic. So it's very geeky, but I love the project.
So how where do people find that one?
Yes, it's dsiprouter.org.
Oh, .org. Okay, got it.
Yeah, yeah. I will put it out here as well. I can put it in there as well.
I
So
was gonna say it may pop up under my name, but it's all good in the chat. And
yeah.
as we get everything all published out, we'll have show notes and things like that for sure. But just any ideas that folks have or things that you want to talk about or think we could shine some light on. We love to have, I think, varied topics from the Hacking with the Homies perspective. If you ever attended the conference, then you would be familiar with, every year we always try to pick things that we think need to be talked about more, versus more of the same, because that's really where we want people to grow. We don't want you to keep hearing the same things over and over again. We want you to know, like, here's what you should be looking to towards the future for really advancing your career, and being able to stand out. So that is really what we want to bring to this show overall. So we always want to come up with new topics and anything that folks thinks would be interesting.
Yes. And since we're talking about hacking with the homies, we are moving the conference to the spring. And I am looking for the date right now.
Yeah, let me see if my calendar is up.
Yeah, let's see here. It's gonna be that way when you come to Detroit, you won't be freezing, and we won't have any snowstorms that can cause us to have issues with attendance. So we are like
So
super.
we're looking at we're doing Saturday, right? So
Yeah.
that's a May 11th, 2024.
Yes. So this is actually gonna be our fifth year, Jessica, doing this thing. So it's pretty crazy. Uh yeah.
We started what literally the 2020 right before the shutdown and everything. We had our first event. We went virtual for a few years, and then this year was our first time going hybrid. Next year we decided, like you said, maybe we don't try to do a conference of in the middle of February in Detroit because yes, but I'm excited. 5 years, it means a lot for everybody that has supported the Detroit Black Tech Group, for everybody that has supported Hacking with the Homies. And we just want to be even more consistent and more involved and, get folks, participating overall. So that is May 11th, Saturday, May 11th, 2024. It's going to be our 5 year anniversary. I'm like trying to figure out, first of all, we have to have swag. That's like super necessary.
Sure.
Um,
For sure.
and we'll start figuring out what kind of content folks want to see as well. But I'm excited for that. So you can definitely follow along with this show, of course, for different topics. We have our YouTube channel. This is going to be this podcast will be able to be subscribed to, but also you can go find us over on YouTube if you want to follow up with the show, if you want to see the most the quickest way to hear it after the fact is going to be on YouTube because it's going to be live as soon as we get done. And you'll be able to follow the show over there as well. So I highly encourage folks. Are we just at Hacking with the Homies on YouTube?
Yeah, it's just hacking with the homies on YouTube.
Let's see. I feel
It,
like I got a banner for that one.
yes, it should be here. I can just I can give it to you 1 second here.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, but overall, definitely want to say thank you for everybody that's been hanging around and commenting. Again, my shameless plug is that you can follow me at MetaDevGirl, pretty much all socials. I'm at Jessica on GitHub, JESEEKIA on GitHub, and I am, in addition to our Hacking with the Homies, which is once a month. I also live stream our Train X show, which is also once a month. That is our AI show. So that'll be in 2 weeks. You'll be able to hear more from our AI check in for this month. And then I also have Girl Develop It, which is going to be 1 month. 1 day out, 1 week out of the month, and then Crawl Walk Run is 1 week out of the month. So if any Thursday at lunchtime, if you come find me, we will be talking about something tech related. And so I'm just doing my best this year to be supportive as much as I can and helping to educate the community because I think that's where, my passion really lies. So happy to always see new faces and see familiar faces as well, following along with that journey. So done with my little plug.
No, that's great. No, I mean, I think we both came to a conclusion that we do this hacking with the homies conference every year, and it has great turnout. Um, but I think we needed to be able to people get engaged with us throughout the year. So I think you're doing your deal by by having all the podcasts every week. I need to step my game up. So Jessica is making me step my game up. And definitely I'm gonna start a podcast as well. Maybe open source. Maybe I'll do it on open source or something. But you can follow me at most platforms. This is going to be Mac Hendricks. On Instagram, it's going to be called Machine Maker. At some point, I'll change that to my name. But there's another story, but again, like Jessica said, thank you for everyone that's actually supported all the things that we do. And we look forward to Hacking with the Homies 2024 being in Detroit in May 11th.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Take care.